There is a quiet exhaustion that comes from fighting your own mind every day. You wake up already tense, already reacting, already bracing for something that has not happened yet. Emotions arrive without permission, drag your attention away, and demand obedience. Anxiety whispers about the future. Frustration rewrites the past. And somewhere in between, you begin to feel as if life itself is the enemy. But look closer. Life is not attacking you. It is your relationship with what happens that has turned against you. This is not about becoming cold or detached. It is about stopping the internal civil war. Right now, emotions feel powerful because they are unchallenged. They speak first, and reason arrives late, if at all. Marcus Aurelius warned of this exact danger when he wrote in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 2, Paragraph 1, that the mind must prepare itself at dawn to meet difficulty without surprise or resentment. He was not talking about controlling the world. He was talking about governing the self before chaos claims authority. If you feel enslaved by reactions you do not choose, this is where freedom begins. Not by forcing emotions to disappear, but by understanding their limits. Not by hoping for calm circumstances, but by learning how to remain steady when circumstances refuse to cooperate. The chaos you feel is not proof of weakness. It is proof of misplaced control, and that misunderstanding can be corrected. What follows is not comfort in the form of reassurance. It is comfort in the form of clarity. And clarity, once it takes root, changes how everything feels. The false promise of control. Most suffering does not begin with pain itself, but with a belief about how life should behave. You expect effort to guarantee results. You expect people to act reasonably. You expect the future to reward preparation. And when these expectations are broken, emotion rushes in to fill the gap. Frustration, anxiety, resentment, fear, not because something terrible happened, but because reality failed to obey your internal contract. This is the false promise of control. It tells you that peace is something you earn by managing outcomes, that calm is the reward for doing everything right, that if you stay alert enough, plan enough, worry enough, you can prevent disorder. At first, this belief feels responsible. It feels mature. In truth, it is the root of exhaustion. Because the world does not submit to vigilance, it does not negotiate with anxiety, and it does not bend to effort alone. Epictetus confronted this illusion with ruthless clarity in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 1, where he explains that some things depend on us and others do not, and that happiness and misery follow directly from how we confuse the two. This is not abstract philosophy. It is a diagnosis. When you attempt to control what does not depend on you, you place your emotional stability in the hands of chance. You become reactive, not because you are weak, but because you have given authority to forces that cannot be commanded. Notice how this plays out in daily life. You check a message and wait for a reply. Silence becomes a story. A delay becomes rejection. You imagine futures that do not exist yet and react to them as if they were facts. You replay past decisions, trying to rewrite what is already finished. None of this brings control. It only multiplies noise. The mind becomes busy, but never effective, alert, but never calm. Marcus Aurelius observed this pattern repeatedly. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, Paragraph 47, he reminds himself that you have power over your mind, not outside events, and that realizing this brings strength, not relief. Strength. Because strength does not come from bending reality, but from standing correctly within it. The more you try to manage outcomes, the more fragile you feel when they shift. The more you demand certainty, the more intolerable uncertainty becomes. This is why emotional chaos feels constant. You are fighting on the wrong battlefield. You are expending energy where no leverage exists. Self-control cannot grow in that environment. It is suffocated by endless negotiation with life. You are always reacting, always adjusting, always bracing. Calm feels temporary because it depends on circumstances staying favorable. The turning point is subtle, but decisive. It begins when you stop asking how to control what happens and start asking what part of this situation truly belongs to you. Not the result, not the timing, not the behavior of others, but your judgment, your response, your willingness to accept reality as it is, not as your fear demands it to be. This shift does not remove difficulty. It removes the added suffering created by resistance. And once that distinction becomes clear, the entire struggle changes direction. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel precise, and chaos, when accurately understood, loses much of its power. The hidden source of chaos judgment, not events. If you observe your own distress closely, you will notice something uncomfortable but liberating. The intensity of your suffering rarely matches the intensity of what actually happened. There is a gap, and inside that gap, something decisive occurs. An event appears, neutral, unshaped. Then the mind rushes in to interpret, to label, to predict, to condemn. What you feel afterward is not caused directly by the event, but by the story you tell yourself about it. This is where chaos is born, not in circumstances, but in judgment. A delayed response becomes disrespect. A mistake becomes failure. An uncertain future becomes catastrophe. None of these conclusions are facts. They are interpretations presented as truth. Once accepted, emotions follow automatically. Anxiety feels justified. Anger feels necessary. Fear feels protective. But what they are responding to is not reality. They are responding to an opinion disguised as certainty. Epictetus makes this distinction with precision in Enchiridion of Epictetus, chapter 5. When he explains that it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. This is not a comforting statement, it is a demanding one, because it removes the luxury of blaming events for your inner state. It places responsibility exactly where it belongs, in the way you interpret what happens. Consider how quickly the mind escalates. One unexpected expense becomes proof that nothing is stable. One criticism becomes evidence that you are inadequate. One moment of silence becomes rejection. The emotional reaction feels immediate, but it is not. There is always a fraction of time where judgment enters. And in that fraction, freedom either survives or disappears. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to catch this moment. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 8, paragraph 49, he reminds himself to strip events of the opinions added to them and to see them as they truly are, not softened, not dramatized, simply accurate. This practice was not about optimism, it was about precision. Because precision calms the mind more effectively than reassurance ever could. When judgment goes unexamined, emotions take command. They do not ask permission, they do not wait for evidence. They respond to meaning, not facts. That is why emotional chaos feels uncontrollable. You are reacting to conclusions you did not consciously choose. The mind speaks quickly, confidently, and often falsely. This does not mean emotions are enemies, they are signals. But signals become dangerous when mistaken for commands. Reason does not erase emotion, it places it in context. It asks, what exactly has happened, and what have I added to it? Often what you have added is heavier than the event itself. The moment you learn to separate event from interpretation, chaos begins to thin. Problems remain problems, but they stop becoming personal attacks. Uncertainty remains uncertainty, but it no longer feels like a threat to your worth. Life becomes less dramatic, not because it is easier, but because it is clearer. This is a quiet power, and once you experience it, you begin to see why true self-control has never been about suppressing feeling, but about governing judgment. That understanding opens the door to a more precise kind of freedom, one that does not depend on life-changing, but on perception becoming accurate. The dichotomy of control reimagined. Once you see that judgment, not events, is the true source of chaos, a new question naturally emerges. If my suffering is intensified by how I interpret what happens, then where does my responsibility actually begin and end? This is where the Stoic dichotomy of control stops being a concept and becomes a mental instrument. Most people treat the dichotomy of control as a rule to memorize. Some things are up to you, others are not. Then they return to life unchanged. The Stoics never intended it to be passive knowledge. It was designed as a filter, a way of sorting reality in real time. especially when emotions surge and clarity feels distant. Epictetus did not present this distinction as philosophy for reflection alone. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 1, he makes it clear that confusion between what depends on us and what does not is the direct cause of agitation, fear, and inner slavery. The purpose was practical. When something happens, the mind must immediately ask a precise question. Does this belong to me or does it belong to fate? What belongs to you is narrow but powerful. Your judgments, your intentions, your values, your actions chosen in the present moment. What does not belong to you is vast. Outcomes, other people's opinions, timing, the past, the future, the body's vulnerabilities, chance. When these two categories are mixed, emotional chaos follows. When they are separated, something stabilizing occurs. This is not resignation. It is accuracy. When you treat what is uncontrollable as if it were controllable, you experience constant tension. When you treat what is controllable as if it were uncontrollable, you feel helpless. The dichotomy of control corrects both errors at once. It removes false responsibility and restores real responsibility. Imagine anxiety through this lens. Anxiety thrives on imagined control over the future. It rehearses scenarios, searches for guarantees, demands certainty. The dichotomy interrupts this process. The future is not yours. Preparation may be, intention may be, but outcomes are not. Once this boundary is clearly drawn, the emotional charge begins to dissolve. Not because the future becomes safe, but because your mind stops trespassing where it has no authority. Marcus Aurelius applied this discipline relentlessly. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 7, paragraph 54, he reminds himself not to waste time on things beyond his control and to return immediately to what depends on him. This was not detachment from life, it was devotion to effectiveness. Energy conserved from resistance could be invested in virtue, clarity, and right action. The relief that follows this practice is often misunderstood. It is not comfort, it is lightness. The mental weight of carrying the world drops away. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop arguing with fate. You begin to act where action is possible and accept where acceptance is required. This is why the dichotomy of control feels freeing. It restores proportion. At first, this feels unfamiliar. You may notice how often the mind reaches outward, trying to manage reactions, results, and recognition. Each time you catch this movement and redirect it inward, something strengthens. Self-control becomes less about force and more about orientation. You are no longer scattered, you are placed. This mental filter does not eliminate difficulty, it eliminates confusion, and confusion is what makes difficulty unbearable. Once clarity replaces confusion, chaos loses its drama. What remains is life as it is, demanding attention, courage, and reason. And that is a challenge the disciplined mind can finally meet. Acceptance of fate as mental strength, not passivity. Once the boundary between what depends on you and what does not becomes clear, resistance begins to look different. You start to notice how much energy is spent arguing with reality, not out loud, but internally, wishing events had unfolded differently, replaying moments that cannot be revised, resenting conditions that were never under your command. This quiet opposition to what has already happened is one of the greatest sources of exhaustion. Acceptance of fate is often misunderstood because it is confused with surrender. But the Stoics never taught passivity. They taught alignment. To accept fate is not to approve of every outcome. It is to stop pretending that rejection of reality gives you leverage over it. It does not. It only fragments the mind. Seneca addressed this with precision in Letters from Seneca, Letter 107, where he explains that a person who accepts necessity without complaint remains free, while one who resists what must be endures double suffering. One suffering comes from the event itself, the other comes from resistance. The second is always optional, though rarely recognized as such. Resistance drains strength because it demands the impossible. It asks the past to change and the present to justify itself. Acceptance, by contrast, reallocates energy. When you no longer fight what has already occurred, attention returns to what can still be shaped. Character, conduct, response, dignity. These remain intact even when circumstances are harsh. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea repeatedly. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, paragraph 41, he reminds himself to love what happens as something woven into his destiny, not because it is pleasant, but because it is necessary. This was not optimism, it was discipline. To love fate was to cease internal rebellion and reclaim mental order. Emotional chaos thrives in the space between reality and refusal. Anxiety lives in imagined alternatives. Regret feeds on hypothetical rewrites. Anger persists because it refuses to release a demand that can no longer be fulfilled. Acceptance collapses this space. When there is no internal argument, emotions lose fuel. They still appear, but they no longer dominate. This does not make you passive, it makes you precise. Acceptance clarifies where effort is wasted and where it is meaningful. You stop trying to control the uncontrollable and begin applying yourself fully where your influence is real. This is strength, quiet, deliberate, and resilient. There is dignity in standing in agreement with reality, even when it is difficult. Not agreement of preference, but agreement of fact. When the mind stops resisting what is, it regains its capacity to act well within it. Fate sets the stage. You decide how to stand upon it. This is why acceptance is not the end of action. It is the beginning of effective action. And once this is understood, emotional turbulence no longer feels like an enemy to defeat, but a signal to realign. What follows is a form of self-control that does not require suppression, only clarity. Self-control, redefined, from suppression to sovereignty. Most people misunderstand self-control because they associate it with force, clenching the jaw, holding back emotion, staying rigid while pressure builds inside. This version of control feels exhausting because it is built on resistance, and anything maintained by constant resistance eventually breaks. The Stoics did not teach this. They taught something far more sustainable: sovereignty. Self-control, in its Stoic sense, is not the silencing of emotion, but the refusal to be ruled by it. Emotions arise naturally. They are part of being human. What turns them into chaos is not their presence, but their authority. When emotion dictates action without examination, reason is displaced. The result is regret, reactivity, and inner disorder. Marcus Aurelius understood this distinction deeply. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, paragraph 28, he reminds himself that the mind has the power to withdraw from impressions and refuse assent. This single act, the pause before agreement, is where sovereignty lives. You do not control what appears in the mind. You control whether you consent to it. This is where freedom begins to feel real, not when emotions disappear, but when they are no longer mistaken for commands. Anger can be present without becoming cruelty. Fear can exist without becoming paralysis. Sadness can pass through without defining identity. Self-control is the space between impulse and action, where reason quietly asks whether this response aligns with your values. Suppression collapses that space. Sovereignty expands it. When you suppress emotion, you treat it as an enemy. It retreats temporarily, then returns stronger, distorted, and resentful. When you observe emotion without surrendering authority, it softens. It reveals its message without demanding obedience. Seneca describes this process in Letters from Seneca, Letter 11, where he advises examining emotional movements as they arise, not to eliminate them, but to prevent them from becoming habits of the soul. This practice requires honesty. You must be willing to admit what you feel without justifying it. You must see the emotion clearly, name it accurately, and then decide what to do with it. This decision is the act of self-control, not the emotion itself, not the intensity, the decision. Chaos feels powerful because it feels urgent. Emotions rush you toward action, convincing you that delay is dangerous. Self-control interrupts this urgency. It restores time, and with time, judgment returns. You begin to act deliberately rather than reflexively. This is why self-controlled people appear calm, not because they feel less, but because they decide more. Epictetus reinforces this in Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 18, where he explains that freedom is not the absence of disturbance, but the ability to meet disturbance without losing oneself. To remain intact under pressure is not numbness, it is mastery. This mastery does not arrive instantly. It is practiced in small moments, choosing silence instead of escalation, choosing patience instead of prediction, choosing principle instead of impulse. Each choice strengthens sovereignty. Over time, emotional storms still arrive, but they no longer take the helm. This is the freedom promised by self-control. Not a life without emotion, but a life where emotion no longer decides who you become. And once sovereignty is established within, the mind is ready for its final anchor. Reason. Not as cold logic, but as a steady guide when emotions grow loud. Reason as an anchor in emotional storms. When emotions surge, most people believe reason disappears. That belief itself is the problem. Reason does not vanish under pressure, it is simply ignored. Emotional chaos feels overwhelming because it speaks loudly and urgently, while reason speaks quietly and waits to be invited. Self-control is the decision to invite it back into the conversation. Reason, in the Stoic sense, is not cold calculation, it is orientation. It asks one essential question in the middle of disturbance. What is happening and what part of this belongs to me? This question does not suppress emotion, it places it within limits. It reminds the mind that intensity is not authority. Marcus Aurelius relied on this anchor repeatedly. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, Paragraph 3, he reminds himself that the ruling mind can remain unmoved if it does not add opinion to impressions. This is not denial. It is restraint at the level of meaning. When reason intervenes, emotion is no longer free to exaggerate, predict, or condemn without evidence. Emotional storms gain strength from speed. They rush you forward, convincing you that action must be immediate. Reason slows the process just enough for clarity to return. That pause is everything. In it, you begin to see that most emotional suffering is not caused by what is happening now, but by what you fear will happen next, or what you believe should not have happened at all. Epictetus understood this mechanism clearly. In Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 3, he explains that when impressions strike the mind, we must not be carried away by them, but examine them and ask what they truly represent. This examination is reason in action. It does not argue with emotion. It evaluates the claim emotion is making. Fear claims danger. Reason asks where the danger actually is. Anger claims injustice. Reason asks what standard has been violated and whether retaliation serves virtue. Anxiety claims urgency. Reason asks what action is possible now and what must be left to time. Again and again, reason returns the mind to proportion. This practice is not theoretical. It happens in moments that feel small but are decisive, when a thought spirals toward catastrophe and you interrupt it, when a feeling pushes you toward reaction and you choose restraint, when uncertainty demands prediction and you choose presence. Each time reason is applied, the storm weakens. This is why Stoic discipline emphasizes repetition, not because understanding is difficult, but because emotion is persistent. Reason must be trained to respond automatically, just as emotion does. Seneca addresses this in Letters from Seneca, Letter 16, where he explains that philosophy must be practiced daily so that it becomes a habit of thought, ready when difficulty arrives. Over time, something changes. You begin to trust reason more than impulse. You notice that emotions pass whether you obey them or not. You see that clarity arrives faster when you do not chase certainty. Emotional storms still appear, but they no longer feel threatening. They feel temporary. Reason does not remove emotion from your life. It gives emotion a place. And when emotion is placed correctly, it no longer destabilizes the whole mind. It becomes information, not instruction. This is the quiet strength that grows when reason is consistently invited back. A mind that can feel deeply without losing direction. A mind that can face uncertainty without inventing disaster. A mind that remains anchored even when the waters are rough. And once this anchor is secure, a final shift begins to unfold. One that does not depend on circumstances changing, but on the way you inhabit them. The quiet shift, What changes? When nothing outside changes. At some point, without announcement, you notice something different. The world has not softened, people remain unpredictable. Outcomes still escape your control. Uncertainty continues to exist. And yet, the chaos that once felt overwhelming no longer dominates your inner life. This is the quiet shift, not dramatic, not visible from the outside, but unmistakable from within. What has changed is not reality, but your position inside it. Before, every external disturbance reached straight into your center. A setback felt like a verdict, a delay felt like a threat, an emotion felt like a command. Now, there is space. Events arrive, but they no longer collapse your internal order. Emotions arise, but they no longer define the moment. You are present without being invaded. Marcus Aurelius described this state with striking clarity in Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 4, paragraph 49, where he reminds himself that the mind becomes invincible when it withdraws into itself and remains content with acting justly, not because the world becomes fair, but because the mind stops outsourcing its stability. This is the result of everything that came before. The false promise of control has been abandoned. Judgment has been examined. The boundary between what depends on you and what does not has been clarified. Fate has been accepted without resentment. Reason has been practiced as an anchor. None of these steps removed difficulty. Together, they removed inner fragmentation. You begin to notice how much energy was once spent resisting reality, complaining internally, arguing with what already happened, anticipating threats that never arrived. That energy is now available, not for dominance, but for presence. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of obey. You act without demanding guarantees. Emotional steadiness does not feel like numbness. It feels like proportion. Joy is cleaner because it is not desperate. Sadness is lighter because it is not fused with self-blame. Anger dissolves faster because it is not justified by false narratives. Even fear becomes useful, a signal rather than a ruler. Seneca pointed to this transformation in Letters from Seneca, Letter 31, where he explains that true happiness is not the absence of disturbance, but the strength to endure it without losing one's nature. The Stoic does not seek a painless life. He seeks a coherent one. This coherence changes how you move through the day. Small frustrations no longer accumulate into bitterness. Silence no longer demands interpretation. Uncertainty no longer requires immediate resolution. You begin to trust that clarity will come when action is required, and that restraint is itself a form of action. Others may not notice the change at first. You still face challenges. You still experience emotion. But something in you has settled. You are no longer in constant negotiation with reality. You are aligned with it. This alignment creates dignity, and dignity creates calm. The quiet shift is not a conclusion. It is a condition, one that must be maintained through attention and practice. There will be moments of regression, days where emotion regains momentum. The difference now is that you recognize it immediately. Chaos no longer feels mysterious. It feels familiar and therefore manageable. You do not need the world to change to feel steady. You need clarity about where your responsibility ends and where acceptance begins. Once that clarity is embodied, not just understood, inner order becomes durable. This is not control over life. It is command of self. And that command does not announce itself loudly. It is felt in the absence of inner conflict, in the calm execution of duty, and in the quiet confidence that whatever arrives, you will meet it intact. An invitation, not a command. Finally, what remains is not a technique to memorize or a rule to enforce, but a way of standing in the world. Everything you have encountered here points to a single, steady truth. Freedom is not granted by circumstances. It is claimed through alignment. When your judgments are accurate, your efforts proportionate, and your acceptance sincere, life loses its power to scatter you. You may notice that nothing here demanded belief. Nothing required hope in a future version of yourself. This path does not depend on becoming someone else. It depends on returning to what has always been within your reach. Attention, choice, responsibility. These are quiet powers. They do not announce themselves. They do not impress others, but they endure. Marcus Aurelius never wrote to inspire an audience. He wrote to correct himself. In Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Book 12, Paragraph 1, he reminds himself that improvement is not a dramatic event, but a continuous return to reason and virtue. This is the posture being offered to you. Not progress as achievement, but progress as steadiness. If you apply nothing else, apply this. When disturbance arises, pause. Not to escape emotion, but to locate yourself within it. Ask what is truly happening. Ask what depends on you. Ask what must be accepted without bitterness. These questions do not remove difficulty. They prevent difficulty from becoming identity. There will be days when clarity comes easily. There will be days when it does not. The Stoic does not demand consistency from emotion. He demands consistency from character. Even when the mind is noisy, reason can still guide action. Even when emotions are heavy, dignity remains available. This is why self-control, rightly understood, never feels restrictive. It feels spacious. You stop wasting energy on internal conflict. You stop rehearsing outcomes you cannot command. You stop measuring your worth against what was never guaranteed. In that space, something firm takes shape. Trust in your ability to meet whatever comes without losing yourself. No one can do this for you, and no one can take it from you. The world will continue to offer uncertainty. People will continue to disappoint. Fate will continue to unfold without consulting your preferences. None of this needs to be feared. It only needs to be met with clarity. You are not asked to be perfect. You are asked to be present, to act where action is yours, to accept where acceptance is required, to govern judgment so emotion does not rule unchecked. This is not a promise of peace. It is a promise of coherence. And coherence is stronger than comfort. If you return to these principles often, not as ideas but as practices, you will notice something enduring. You are no longer waiting for life to calm down before you feel steady. You carry steadiness with you. And that changes how everything feels, even when nothing changes at all.